Hey guys, welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid and a Monday morning ramble. We are only days away from Hurricane Florence making landfall, if the people who work with the weather are right. We've got a lot of rain here already, but we're a few days away. This is Monday. They're saying it's going to hit land by the end of this week as of this recording. We're going to talk to you this morning about the biggest threat coming with Hurricane Florence that nobody in the media is talking about, okay? And we're going to take a trip around the world, and we're going to take a trip back through time. We're going to start right here in front of my new chicken house I just finished building. Last night was the first night my chickens spent in their new house. We're going to take a trip around the homestead here, visit a couple places of importance of this story. For this story helps make for a better story. And then we're going to end up right back here where we started and see if we look at things differently, and see if we view Hurricane Florence a little bit differently, and see if we need to take a look at how we're going to prepare for Hurricane Florence a little bit differently. So we're going to start about 100 yards away from here, and we're going to go back to the year 1918, even though this story really starts on Halloween of 1938. Just hang in there. It'll make sense by the time I get back to the end. All right, guys, if you're a loyal subscriber who usually turns in for the morning ramble, you know that we do it way up there on top of the hill, a little place we call our campground here on our homestead. We're usually looking down at this area, but I brought you down here this morning, and it's a little dim because I'm holding an umbrella over the phone here, so hopefully we can make this without things getting too blurry. But we're down here in our front field, and I'm going to show you something I've never talked about our property here, and it's actually right on the property line in this little patch of woods that separates our property from our neighbor's property. You can't tell because it's all grown up and it's all secluded, but there's actually a small grave site in there. There's about half a dozen graves and they're unmarked. Site's been here for, well, to my understanding, since 1918, 100 years ago. Now, here's the most in-depth story I've gotten on this gravesite, and it's right back through there. And the guy that lives over there, we've talked to him a couple times. He's a lot like us, lives out in the country because he likes to be left the heck alone. He's personable, he's friendly, but he minds his P's and Q's and we mind ours. But when we run into each other, we always have a pleasant word for each other. But he told me the story of this gravesite over here, and to his understanding, and he's lived over here since the early 1970s, there's about half a dozen children buried over here who died during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. Now, if you don't know too much about history, that was probably the world's deadliest natural disaster, deadliest plague, at least in the last century. Between 50 million and 100 million people died. Okay, between 500,000 and 675,000 people died in the United States alone. It was a worldwide pandemic. Now, the reason it spread worldwide, there's several schools of thought. I'm just going to give you another angle here of the homestead, because we're going to start walking back over this way, because we're going to, when I finish this story, we're going to jump up to Halloween of 1938. But now back to 1918 and this flu epidemic. It's believed that the flu was caused by either swine or birds at Fort Riley in Kansas. Some soldiers had contracted it through what they were eating that was raised on Kansas farms, and then they took this virus allegedly around the world. And I mean, it was terrible. So many people died, and there's graves right here on the border of my property where some children in this area back in 1918 died. Now, store this away to memory, because we're going to talk about how this is one of the biggest fears, or the biggest concerns we need to have in regard to Hurricane Florence, which is a few days away from landfall. Okay, this is a puzzle, guys. This is a puzzle through time and history. And now we're walking up here to my front yard. I've made comments before, and I'm doing it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but maybe not so much, about how I'm the worst homesteader on YouTube. Check out these pumpkins. See this pumpkin? And you see this pumpkin? These are the two best pumpkins, and these are the two only pumpkins that I have growing on my property. Even though on the 4th of July, I spent 3 hours in the heat planting an entire pumpkin patch in my back garden. They all died, but the 2 pumpkins I just showed you, and we're going to check on the fish while we're out here, make sure the pond levels haven't risen too much yet. But those 2 pumpkins I just showed you grew as a result of me kicking last year's jack-o'-lantern off the front porch. Every year, my best pumpkins are the ones that grow accidentally. So at best, I'm like an accidental homesteader anytime I have limited successes. But anyway, Halloween. Actually, the night before Halloween, October 30, 1938. There was a radio show at the time, because this is back before, I mean, there were a few televisions, but the internet certainly wasn't around yet. There was a radio show called the Mercury Theater on the Air. It was hosted by a guy named Orson Welles, and he did a little broadcast that night called The War of the Worlds. It was loosely based, or very tightly based, upon a novel written by H.G. Wells in 1898 called War of the Worlds. So their last names were very close, 1 letter difference, and then so he only added the word "the" to the front of the title of that novel for his radio broadcast. Now here's how this went. You guys are familiar with this story. Somebody was asking about my weeping willow trees. They want to know how they turned out, so I'm going to come over here and take a look at them while we're talking. But so at the beginning of this radio broadcast, which was about an hour long, Orson Welles comes on and he said, you know, here's your Halloween treat. We're going to kind of do a little bit of a skit tonight. This is fiction. It isn't real. Look at this. These are from cuttings that were 18 inches high about 5 months ago. Now we've got dozens and dozens of baby weeping willow trees. And no, we're not leaving them here. We're going to pot these up here probably next year. I know the roots do a lot of damage to the septic and any water lines or whatever. Now, we've got a well over there, so these won't be staying here. But this one's about 6 feet tall. So anyway, they got music playing, all this stuff on the radio show. And then about every 10 minutes or so, Wells would come on and he would interrupt the broadcast, and he started out saying that there were some large, loud explosions heard on the planet Mars. Well, a lot of folks were like, what's this guy talking about? 10 minutes later, he comes back on, says a large spherical object has landed in New Jersey, came from outer space. Well, now more people are listening. And guys, what was going on here was that you know, a lot of folks missed the very beginning of the show, and they never heard the part about how this was fiction, not fact. So the show continues. He's going on and on. Now there are these large, giant, robotic space creatures that have attacked the Earth. They're using poisonous gas to kill people in the cities. They're in New York. Well, it wasn't even really a hoax. It was entertainment, and they said this at the beginning of the show. There's so much wildlife out here. Every now and then I think I see something walking across the field, but we got to keep our eyes open because we do have a 300-pound bear around here. So anyway, now, you guys have probably heard about this. Do you know the best way to hide the truth? Between 2 lies. This is a story about truths, lies, and more lies in herd behavior. I mean, guys, trust me, by the end it's going to make sense. And this is about the biggest thing we have to fear in regard to Hurricane Florence coming in, or any storm. Okay, so the story goes that people were listening to this radio show, and around the country they went into mass hysteria, mass panic. You know, I've followed this for years. I've read about this for years. I remember a story that said farmers in New Jersey were going out with their rifles shooting at water towers because it was dark, but they saw this big dark looming figure and they assumed that it was the big space monster, so they were shooting water towers. There was a story I read once that a husband and wife, I think in Ohio, were killed in a car wreck because they were driving so quickly, trying to flee the area because the big giant alien robots were coming. And so they had to get out of there. A story of, I think a man in LA came home. His wife was getting ready to drink poison. She said she'd rather die that way than be killed by these invaders. Well, what's the truth? Well, we know that there was no space invasion. And as people studied the panic that resulted from this radio show years later, it turns out the panic epidemic or pandemic wasn't as great as was originally reported either. As recently as the 2010s, people who study history believe that this is one of the first examples, or at least 80 years ago, an example of the media lying, stirring up drama for the sake of selling newspapers. This was the story of the day. And people wanted to sell those papers, okay? So maybe there might have been one person that panicked somewhere, but this is what became sensationalized to make it look as if thousands of people were panicking everywhere. Now, we do know people panic, and I'll just get straight to the point right here and let you know that this is the biggest thing we have to worry about with Hurricane Florence coming in here in a few days. We have plenty of water, we have plenty of food. We are going to go out today, several days ahead of the storm, before it makes landfall, from what the news is saying, to get more rations, and here's why. It's not necessarily for the storm. We've got enough to get us through that. Our concern is the aftermath, and it's not Mother Nature, it's the people who are going to panic and what they might do. Clear out the ATM machines. I don't care, because what are we going to need? Our needs are met up here, and we've got everything we need. The bills are paid for the month. We're sure the ATM machines will be back online by October if things get bad, because it's only right now September 10. You know, we kind of live in a society here in the U.S., and we can even go as far as to say around the world, but particularly here in the U.S., where there is herd mentality and herd behavior, and the powers that be, I'll use that term, be it the government or even be it the media, can turn this panic and this fear on like a light switch. It started, well, it didn't. I honestly believe it goes back to the time of the cavemen. Anytime 2 or more people sat around a campfire telling stories, the truth was twisted. And anytime 3 or more people got together as a crowd, there was discourse and people were influenced and manipulated. So now what's this have to do with the Spanish pandemic, 1918? The powers that be learned a big valuable lesson from Orson Welles' panic, media, saying people panic more than they did, basically how to rile up the crowd. Think back to the early 2000s and this avionic bird flu thing that was just going to kill everybody. I went online this morning while I was researching my facts for this idea I'm having about this ramble this morning. And back in 2005, they were saying that over 100 million people worldwide could die. I think they said 150 million people were going to die. And if you, or could die, if you think back, you'll remember anytime you saw the news, there was people wearing these masks everywhere when they were traveling in airports. Everybody was terrified of this bird flu. Well, I tried to find actual death numbers. The closest I could find, oh, it's interesting. I got to this Wikipedia article and they had a beautiful chart showing how many people died in each country. And then there was it said, if you want to know the most up-to-date statistics, and particularly statistics of the U.S., because that's what I was looking for, click on this link where the WHO, World Health Organization, keeps that data. So I clicked, guess what? Error 404, it's a dead link. Why is it there? I mean, I don't want to say they're hiding these numbers. That sounds conspiratorial. What I'll say is, why are these numbers so hard to find? Anyway, I looked at the chart of the actual deaths. You know, now, again, 150 million people could die. Everybody was scared. They were selling the vaccine, making $4 billion, I think, off of that vaccine. It was mostly given to people in the U.S. because this is where everybody goes and gets those things. And I'm not saying I'm pro, for, or against vaccines. This is what happened. I'm just giving you the facts. You use these facts for your own purposes. There were only 2 countries between the years 2003 and 2014 where the statistics were listed. This is 11 years. In that 11-year period, only 2 countries had more than 100 deaths as a result of this bird flu. One was Indonesia, one was Egypt. So I said, okay, how many people? I couldn't find the numbers for the U.S., so I said, let's look at advanced nations. Western, what's considered first world nations. The only one listed was Canada, and that's only because they had 1 death. I think it was in the year 2013. So, anyway, they kept throwing back to the 1918 flu pandemic. You know, and I've got graves here on my property from that pandemic. That's what they used to fuel the fear. Just like Orson Welles used a novel, a piece of fiction written in 1819 to kind of get people riled up. But again, with the Orson Welles broadcast, as many people didn't get riled up as they led you to believe. The media sensationalized everything, just like they sensationalized how many people were. okay, the doctors said this many people could die. Well, the media took out the word could, and by the end of the year, everybody knew 150 million people was going to die because that's what the media was telling us. You saw people prepping, hoarding, all these things. You're seeing it now with Hurricane Florence. Again, I'm not taking Hurricane Florence lightly, but I'm more concerned with the herd behavior and mentality of how people will act in regard to Hurricane Florence than I am Hurricane Florence herself. You know, the more advanced America becomes, American society, and those of you who've been following for a while know that I lived for 5 years, almost 6 years in the Philippines, almost 5 years straight without leaving, with my beautiful bride who I met over there. Our son was born there. We're happy to be back in Virginia now. But man, did I learn so much. We went without electricity and running water for the longest time, living in a bamboo hut in the jungle. We lived through typhoons. We lived through a storm that killed 10,000 people on our island. They were killed by the storm. They weren't killed by the panic. It was Yolanda. It was terrible. So I've been through natural disasters. I was in a war in Iraq, seen tough times. But what I'm telling you is that the way people will react to their fear of the event rather than the event itself is more dangerous in most cases than the event. And the longer I've been back in the U.S. and the more advancements I see that we make, the happier I am that I live in an old sharecropper's house built in 1903 with my wood stove, with my well water. And albeit the well is on an electric pump, but we have a pond, as you saw at the beginning of the video. It's fed from a spring. The water comes right up out of the ground about 100 yards up from the pond. And no matter how hot and dry it's been in the summers that we've been here, that spring has never gone dry, and that water is crisp and clean and ice cold almost coming up out of the ground, even when it's in the 90s. I drink from it often. So we've got a water source, we've got plenty of food, we've got chickens, we're getting close to a dozen eggs a day now, we've got gardens. You know, we've got free-range deer out here that in a worst-case scenario could provide food for my family if it had to come to that. And that would be a last-case scenario because we love our deer. But, guys, don't let the herd and the mob do more damage to you and your family than the hurricane itself can, okay? So I think you get the point I'm trying to make. And this will be sensationalized as it comes, and it'll be sensationalized after. Take care of yourself. Make sure you got plenty of drinking water. Make sure you got plenty of food. Make sure you got plenty of cash to get you through in case the ATMs run out of cash and are offline for a few days. But guys, don't get caught up in the hoopla. Live your life, be prepared, love, live, laugh. That's what we're doing. And now we're going to go down and check the new chicken house and see how our chickens fared their first night in their new home. All right, guys, here we go. We got Miss Cleopatra coming to join us. Hey, Miss Cleopatra, you keeping an eye on the chickens? All right, now, full disclaimer, I have not entered this chicken pen yet today. And by the way, folks, we do free range our chickens. A lot of folks have commented we should free range. If you've been with us for a while, you know that we do. We are keeping them, however, locked up in this pen for 3 or 4 days because of the fact that 8 of our chickens are brand new. We've only had them for 2 or 3 days now. And the 5 we had originally slept in a different pen there for several months. So they say it all comes home to roost, but only when it knows where home is. So we're leaving them in here for a few days before we just come out and open this up and leave it open. And our chickens have been foraging. They go just about everywhere. And yes, they're predators, and yes, we have ways of dealing with that, but that's also just something that's par for the course when you have chickens. So here's how we secured our door. You remember we have a sliding door, tightly tied with tie off here on both sides up here, and down here we have a log that weighs maybe 28 pounds. It's chalked off with wood. My 7-year-old son couldn't move that, so I doubt a raccoon will either. And look who's in here, wakey wake, and eating their breakfast. Got a couple sleepyheads sleeping in there, but none of the... Something pushed in on here. Looks like they had some visitors last night because I did not do that. That's been pushed in on. None of the chicken wire has been ripped off. I'm not seeing any blood, guts, and gore in there. We got, let's see, 1, 2, 3. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 chickens, all alive and well. That's how many we started with last night. That's how many we have now. And the chicken wire is still on. And I took some wonderful advice some subscribers gave us. And I put lumber on top of the tarp. keep it from being blown away. And I even covered up this hole that was here that somebody pointed out was here that a weasel could get through. So it appears as if our little feathered friends here made it through their first night in their new home. So that's wonderful news. And we do have more precautions we're going to take when the storm comes in. We're going to cover all this up if we need to with some very thick vapor lining we have that's brand new, still in the package. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this morning ramble. And my key point here is don't buy into the fear, okay? And remember, the best way to hide a lie is between two truths, or the best way to hide the truth is between two lies. The media, the powers that be, they do that all day long to flip us on and off like a switch, to sell whatever medications or control the herd, whichever way they want. And for those newspapers and those blog writers and all those people out there to get the clicks, don't buy into the hype, okay? Be prepared, but don't be paranoid. Unless you've got a 300-pound bear somewhere on your property. We'll see you with more next time here at Homesteading Off the Grid.